Here today with President Sam Stanley, and we're joined on the program with our acting provost, Teresa Sullivan. So thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
When you joined us as provost, it was exciting to me because we're both alums of James Madison College, which is near and dear to my heart, and so I have some questions about that later. But let's start with. For those that might not be aware, what is a provost?
You know, it's an old military term, and most people aren't too familiar with it outside the college setting. But the provost is the chief academic officer, which means the provost is ultimately responsible for the faculty from hiring to retirement and for the students from admission to graduation.
In coming back to MSU, and obviously you've been connected and have been back many times over the years, but any surprises now that you're sort of knee deep in things as provost? Anything that's struck you as maybe unexpected?
Gee, I think that the new buildings are quite exciting. That's different. But Michigan State was about this size when I was an undergraduate, and that all feels very familiar, including the fact that this campus never feels crowded despite the number of people who are on it every day. And I think that's partly because of the beautiful grounds, which has always been to me one of the distinguishing factors about Michigan State.
You spent your early part of your career as provost at the University of Michigan. Then you went on to become president at the University of Virginia. And after a very successful time spent there, decided to retire. President Stanley twisted your arm back into service here temporarily as we search for a provost. Yeah, as you think about your career and your time spent in higher education, how has it changed since your earlier days of your career?
I think one of the really important changes has been a mindset change from the university as the sieve that, you know, is essentially involved in a weeding out function for those who are not worthy to be here. The old phrase about look to your right, look to your left, only one of you will be here. I think that's changed to the view that if you got admitted, we have a responsibility to make it possible for you to succeed. And I know President Stanley has an important student success agenda. I think that's a real difference. And it shows up in lots of things. It shows up in the ways we teach, greater attention paid to advising, generally just making it easier for students to figure out what it is they need to do to graduate. That's different. I would say when I was here, it was more a matter of, here's a maze, let's see if you're bright enough to run it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really been, I'd say, a seismic shift and one for the better in how we think about it. And, you know, this just whole concept of student success, as Terry said, as opposed to let's be elite and weed out as many people as we can, and we'll proclaim to the world how elite we are and how many people we turned away to educate so few. That really has changed, and I think, as I said before, for the better. And I think MSU is uniquely poised to participate, and but it really does help give us our markings on where we need to be going in terms of doing even better in helping students who we deem ability to be successful at MSU, to give them the opportunity to really succeed. And so I think that, to me, becomes a critical part of, as we do strategic planning for the future, is how we integrate these concepts of student success in everything we're doing.
But I'd say it also involves a mindset change all the way down to the individual student. Faculty members need to think about the problems students are having in learning and trying to help them overcome those problems. That's often hard if you're a faculty member. You're really gifted in the subject. You don't really see why it's not obvious to everybody else. So you have to try and put yourself in the student's shoes. And for the students, it means shifting from a mindset which says, I'm having trouble at this, so I'm not naturally good at it, so I should quit this field and go do something else. Instead, we'd like students to think, this is hard, but I've done hard things. I can learn this. And persevere in the kinds of difficult courses that often lead to more rewarding majors.
As we think about the mission of the university, and something that's always been dear to my heart is the land-grant mission, which really calls out a mission of service to our community and through research-based outreach. How does that connect between the faculty member, the student? How does that provide for a richer experience for our students?
Well, Michigan State's one of the top 10 schools in the country in terms of service learning, which means an integration of outreach into the community with your classroom work. And so faculty members here have become very good at looking for ways to help their students apply their knowledge in a real setting. That's also good for the student. It helps them see immediately how their knowledge can be applied, and it also helps them think about, oh, is this a field in which I might want to pursue work after graduation? So it works for everybody.
And I think it's really important, as Terry said, those kinds of experiences actually matter to student success. So bringing us back to the topic we were talking about before, we know that students who get engaged in this type of learning are more likely to succeed and more likely to graduate. So it's really a wonderful, virtuous circle from that point of view.
And how does study abroad play into that?
Well, study abroad is another one of those experiences which is deeply transformational for students, especially students who may not have grown up in a family that went abroad for vacations. When you do surveys of students after they graduate, if they studied abroad, they list it as the most important educational experience they had. It's partly the immersion in a different culture, seeing how people in other places do things differently. It's partly the opportunity to learn in a different setting, and in many cases, to apply what you've already learned in a new setting.
And MSU's been a leader in that area for a number of years, and I think has a great track record in doing this. And I think at one of the ceremonies I was at, people were asked to raise their hand if they'd had a study abroad experience, and fully it looked like a third to almost a half of the audience of the students of that audience raised their hand. So it really very much permeates the experience at MSU.
It's I know that as not only as an employee of the university, but as a person who's been parent of two students at the university, both of whom have had a study abroad opportunity. It is really a life-changing experience. And my daughter studied abroad in Germany. My son went to Greece on a study abroad that was uniquely Spartan-oriented, and both had really life-changing experiences and had a spectacular time of it.
Yeah. Did they actually visit Sparta as part of their?
They did.
Yeah,
they
so
did.
It
was really something, and I'm very jealous because I've had an opportunity to do a fair bit of travel, but have never gotten there. So maybe someday.
And I think one of the things that we want to do is make even a bigger effort to provide those opportunities for students. So that's a focal area for us in scholarship and raising, because sometimes students may see a barrier to going abroad. The travel costs may be a barrier to them. So just getting scholarships in the $1,000 to $2,000 range can make a difference in a student's ability to go travel overseas. So that's something we always want to be considering as we're doing our fundraising.
And one thing that we've been very good at, we have a lot of our own study abroad programs led by our own faculty members. And often that gives parents some peace of mind because they know that there is someone they view as a responsible adult who will be there along with their student traveling abroad. I also want to mention that students who study abroad have more job opportunities open to them as well, because many employers these days are looking for people who can work in multinational work groups because they've got themselves a supply chain abroad, they've got markets abroad. They want to have workers who feel comfortable working in more than one nationality.
So in my experience, I grew up in Lansing, did my undergraduate work here at Michigan State, went away to law school briefly, but then came back and have really been at MSU ever since. As a person who's been at a number of very prestigious universities, what makes MSU unique? What's different about MSU?
I think the land-grant mission really permeates life here at MSU in a way it does not at many schools. I think there's a real sense of mission here that we do something different, that we give a chance to the students who might not otherwise have had a chance. I think there's also just the huge variety of subjects you can study at Michigan State, an exceptionally broad range, really. And that offers students the opportunity, they don't have to major in those fields, but at least to take a course in an area that might not even be available to them somewhere else. And then there's the great diversity of the student body. You rub shoulders with students from 100 foreign countries as well as 50 states in the Union. It gives you a real opportunity to think and interact with people who may not think and interact the same way you do.
And I think that sense of pride as well. I think that's something I've seen, someone who's really come in from the outside, is how proud people are to be Spartans. And again, you mentioned the fact that Terry is very proud to have been a graduate of James Madison College at MSU. And I think that kind of sense of identity of being a Spartan and what that stands for and what the school means to the state and to the world, I think is a very powerful thing as well. And I just to switch gears just for a second, one of the things that's very impressive about Terry is that, she's, obviously doing all the administrative work at UVA and here, but she's remained continuing her work as a scholar as well. And she has 2 books coming out, I think, which I'm incredibly impressed by. I've never written a book, actually. Articles, never a book. 2 books coming out are just out now. Could you just tell the audience a little about those?
Sure. One of these is called The Fragile Middle Class, published by Yale, and it's actually the 2020 version of a book that was originally published 20 years ago. It was sufficiently successful that Yale wanted to bring it back out again for a new generation of students. The second one came out in the e-edition yesterday. It's called Census 2020, Understanding the Issues. Very timely because the 2020 census is upon us. It'll be out in hard form next month, but now you can get it electronically from Springer.
That's very exciting, and I think that speaks to the role of not only the faculty member's administrator, but the faculty member as a disseminator of information and research, and the ability to juggle those balls is pretty extraordinary. That's pretty special. One of the things that I always find interesting, the older I get, and maybe the less the further I am from my undergraduate experience, is how for young people that are current students and they see a person who's a senior administrator, and in some ways it's sort of challenging for them to sort of mentally accept that we were in their shoes once upon a time, and that we were all undergraduate students once upon a time. As you think back to your undergraduate time at MSU, what sticks out? Was there a unique moment or experience or a class or a faculty member that you go back to as a pivotal moment in shaping you as a person?
I think the introductory policy class at James Madison was really a revelation to me. A team taught class that really went heavily into the classics of philosophy, American history, sociology, and economics. And there were many formative classes I took later on, but I also remember particularly the friend group that I developed at James Madison. They've been lifelong friends of mine. We interact with each other all the time. Now we can do it electronically, which makes it much easier. They were formative influences on me then, and they still are.
That's very similar to my experience. I lived on 6 North Case Hall, and some of the people I met freshman year in our Madison classes that lived on that floor remain lifelong friends, and we still, depending on our perspective, either love or lament the Federalist Papers. So all from that introductory policy class. So we've got a number of big projects going on at MSU, from some of the construction projects that you mentioned to the modernization of the backbone of our IT system that students deal with. Mm-hmm. How, and as a student, I think you, or even as a faculty member, you sort of go to those systems or go to those databases, and they just sort of always work. And it's easy to miss the fact that there are sometimes hundreds of folks behind the scenes that build and fix and troubleshoot and interact with all those systems and processes. How much is that a part of the daily life of the provost, making sure that sort of all of the stuff behind the curtain is functioning and in such a seamless way?
Well, I think there's 2 important conversations I've been involved in there. One of them is about our Student Information System, SIS, which has reached the end of its working life. It's no longer being serviced by its original commercial provider. And we now have because departments linked into it. We have some 480 departmental programs that are linked to it. So you don't just change the backbone; you got to change everything else that is feeding from the backbone, and that's a really complicated process. So we've spent a year thinking about the technical aspects of it from the backbone perspective. The next year we're going to spend talking with the users about their perspective so that we can be sure that when we flip the switch, everything really does work the way it should. The other conversation is around electronic medical records. And that's an issue for our Student Health Center, also for our clinical practice. And electronic medical records are heavily regulated by the federal government. There aren't very many providers. And student health services often need somewhat different bells and whistles on their electronic medical record than other uses do. So again, we're talking about what would best suit our needs and what do we need to do there.
I think the SIS system is extraordinarily important, essentially, for the university. So as the provost said, this has to be done right. There's really no margin for failing in it. It's a core business, if you will. I mean, we don't talk about the university sometimes as a business, but this is core to our business practices. At the same time, it's core to those things related to student success as well, because if used well, it can become a source of big data that allows you to take a look at things like recruitment of students, whose targets that we can look at, allows you to really measure better our success of our advising and how we advise students and what's the data that tells students. If you take this sequence of courses your freshman year, you're more likely to not be able to move on to the major you want. So this is how you should change this sequence of courses to be more effective for you. Giving that kind of individualized learning is very much data dependent. And so again, this SIS system has to allow us to get into those data fields if we're going to be successful again in advising students and helping them navigate and succeed in MSU. So stakes are high, and it's got to be done right. And I appreciate the fact that Terry has come in along with Melissa Wu, our new CIO, to really take a look at that project and make sure that, as she said, when we flip the switch, it's going to be able to work. It won't have all the capabilities I've talked about in its first iteration. Some of those will come over time, but we've got to make sure that the core functions work really well as we turn it on to begin with.
We're a very complex organization with so many opportunities for majors and different programs, and certainly the coursework that you need to take for one isn't necessarily compatible with another, and having the tools that help you sort through that and help guide you through that process are critically important. So Terry, one last question. I, as a person who's worked with the provost for a number of years, it's not a role that I would necessarily describe as always fun. But what's the most fun thing that you've been able to experience, a memorable experience from your time thus far as provost?
When you're provost, the best day of the year is graduation. And the December graduation was really a highlight. The students are happy. Their parents are happy. It's a great time to see what's best about what we do. And I'm really looking forward to the May graduation for the same reason.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. It's an extraordinarily busy and important role, and thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. And we wish you well in your remaining time in the role.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And on behalf of Michigan State University and all its alumni and supporters, thank you again for your willingness to come on in the interim provost role. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to work with you.
We're honored to have you on board. Thank you.